Okay, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to a new tutorial. It's been quite a while since we uploaded a proper tutorial. I think it might have been 6 months. But from now on, we're going to try and upload a video once a week. So this is going to be a 3-part series tutorial, and we're going to work on the stew shot. Starting with the wide shot, which is going to be part 1 and part 2, and then we're going to focus on the mid shot / close-up in part 3. In this part, which is part 1, we're going to focus on creating the forest fire entirely in After Effects using 2D stock images and our Visual Effects Pro stock footage packs. And you can buy these stock footage packs on visualeffectspro.com, and there's also links in the description. Alright, let's go. Firstly, I want to say that I will be speeding up the parts when I add the fire elements to keep the tutorial from being boring. However, I will explain why I place certain elements in a certain way. Okay, let's start with creating a comp. Press Ctrl and N. I will be using this resolution. For client work, it's actually very important to follow a certain naming format. So I'll add _version 001 at the end of the comp. Then when I render, I am going to add another number from 01, which represents the version within that version. This is something you will have to do, and it's best to get used to it as soon as possible. I'll place a link for Netflix's naming format as an example. Next, make sure you are in 32 bits. You can find that in your project settings. Then let's create our sky. Press Ctrl and Y to create a solid, then add the gradient ramp effect. Make the start color, which is the top, a darker grey, then the end color a lighter grey. Then we're going to create the main background for the shot. So let's bring this stock image into a new comp. Let's just call it stock image. Then duplicate the layer, add a tint effect, then a levels effect. Make the contrast very high, but not too high just yet. Then using the track matte, set it to Luma and inverted. And so this keys are the lighter areas. Now let's pre-comp these two layers. I'll call it background _pre-comp _001. Go into the pre-comp and copy the stock image with the effects on it. Then paste it into the original comp. Let's increase the contrast and also add a fast box blur and make it 0.5. This is just to soften up the edges a little bit. Now I duplicated these elements like this. Here's all of the positions and scale information for my comp, but feel free to place them wherever you'd like. I also masked out some of the branches from this tree, then added a duplicate and made sure the branches around this area are added back, so I changed the levels effect slightly. Here's a change I made. Then I also have this stock image, which I am just going to bring into this comp. I'm going to duplicate it and use the previous method to key out the brighter parts. So let's add tint and levels effects. These are the settings I use, but essentially make it very high contrast. Then use Luma matte with inverted. You can see these parts are also keyed out, so let's duplicate the original stock image and mask out the areas to make them visible again. Now we need to color correct this image to match with the other one. So let's add a curves and bring it down with these 2 points. Desaturate it with the hue / saturation effect. I used a value of -75. Then add a levels effect and bring the black point closer to the white, which will bring up the shadows. Also bring the input white to the left, which will decontrast it even more. Okay, let's go back to the main comp and see what we have. At this point, I like to create the color correction over the entire image. So let's make a new adjustment layer. Add a tritone effect to it. Make the highlight this orangey yellow, the midtones to a rather darker red, and the shadows to be slightly brighter. This will also help making the shot look nighttime but not underexposed. Now, let's continue building our background. I'm going to click on this comp and right click, select Reveal, then select Reveal Layer Source in Project. Then press Ctrl and D to duplicate the comp. Let's rename it background _stock image. Delete the stock image with the hill and let's just focus on expanding the forest. This is how I place them. It really does depend on what you're trying to create though. However, here's the position and scales info. I want to make sure that there is depth and color contrast in the comp. So let's create a new comp using this stock image and call it foreground trees. I'm going to use the same technique once again, so let's make a garbage mat around the tree. Then duplicate the layer and add tint and levels. Make it very high contrast. Then delete the mask on the layer with the effects. Let's pre-comb this and call it extra tree underscore 01. Then make all of these layers 3D. For me, it's just easier to place them this way. Let's duplicate the trees and place them accordingly. These are the placements I made. I'm going to then mask around this particular tree and cut off all of the branches. Let's work on our color correction for these foreground trees. Let's add an exposure effect and bring it down to -6. Then add a tritone effect and make the midtones a bright red and the shadows slightly brighter. Let's go back to our main layer and this is what we have. I wanted to make sure that the exposure at the top is slightly darker, so let's create a new adjustment layer above the sky solid. Add an exposure effect and decrease it to -2.2. I made these masks also to only affect certain areas. And actually, let's copy this adjustment layer and paste it into the stock image comp. I actually ended up creating new masks. Then copy this adjustment layer and paste it into the background underscore stock image comp. No need to make any changes. Okay, let's continue. Let's start adding our stock elements. Go into the smoke volume 1 pack. I really like smoke number 4. These smoke elements were filmed at 60 frames per second, so let's change it to 24 frames per second and bring this asset into a new comp. Even though we changed the frames per second to 24, it's still quite fast in terms of movement. And we want to make our forest fire look large scale. So we want to slow that down. We are going to be using a plugin from Boris FX called Optical Flow. Let's slide the smoke element to the left to find the most appropriate part to use. Then create a new solid by pressing Ctrl and Y. Add optical flow to this solid layer. Make the input layer the smoke asset and let's change the velocity to 25. Let's also turn on frame blending for the smoke element. Then let's pre-comb these layers. Just name it smoke number 4 pre-comp. And finally add the unmold effect. Now let's bring this comp into the main comp. Place it between the background stock image and the stock image layers. Okay, that looks good. I'm gonna mask these two places out so we see more variety. Let's do the same with smoke number 2. This is the part I used. Let's add it below smoke number 4 in the main comp. Let's again do the same with smoke 6. This is the part I used. This time I want to add it between stock image and the foreground trees. And here we go. Let's start adding our fire elements. I am going to create a completely new comp and call it background underscore fire elements. Add the stock image comp, right click on it and enable guide layer. This basically means that this will not show up in other comps or render at all. As I said in the beginning of the tutorial, I won't be placing them individually, rather let's talk about why I position them this way. You want to pick a few hotspots where most of the fire will be placed. I chose this area because it's closer to central and it's also where the most gaps are. So I added large ground fire elements as well as forest fire elements. Making sure they are behind certain gaps like behind the trees and bushes here will give really nice effect when the glow is added. Luckily, in this new After Effects we can avoid making an insane amount of pre-comps as we all used to. For this, I will duplicate the stock image comp and rename it to stock image underscore matte. Before duplicating this comp, you want to make sure that you won't be changing anything in the original comp. Let's bring this stock image matte into the background fire elements. Let's add it to the bottom and select all of our fire elements. Use the pick whip from the track matte to select the stock image matte layer. You want to make sure you are using the alpha matte and also enable inverted. Alright, let's move on to the foreground fire elements. For this, let's duplicate the background fire elements comp. Delete all of the fire elements added, but keep the stock image layer and also keep it as a guide layer. Let's duplicate the foreground trees layer and rename it to foreground trees matte. Bring the original foreground trees layer into the matte comp and then the matte comp into this comp. With the foreground trees matte layer added, let's bring that down to the bottom above our guide layer and select all the fire elements and pick whip the track matte to the matte layer. Again, make sure you're using alpha matte and inverted. And again, here's all of the fire layers I have added. It is a mix of large ground fire, forest fire and structure fire elements. You want to make sure you add these elements on top of the trees at the same spot as the background fire elements. I kind of just populated fire around this tree and the branches on the other side, just making it look like this tree is burning quite fast. You can see as well the reason we got rid of some of the branches is to make it look like more of a dead tree, which makes it more sense that the others are not burning as much as there's a lot of moisture in them. I also want to point out, as an additional detail, I added some elements from the falling fire debris pack to the same dead tree to make it look like maybe some of the branches and leaves are just falling now. Small movements like that can add a lot to the overall composition. So now, speaking of additional details, let's add the foreground burning wood elements. So let's again duplicate the foreground fire elements comp and delete all of the fire elements in it. Here you can see I populated the burning wood assets around the same trees and areas where all of the other fire elements are placed. This makes the trees that are burning a lot more realistic. In this comp, I have also added forest fire elements such as tree trunk fires to the bottom of the tree trunks, which again complements the ground fire layers we added previously. Select all of the burning wood layers and using the pick whip again, select the foreground trees matte as alpha matte and inverted. There's only one more fire comp we're going to create, and that is for one of the foreground trees. I also just brought in the foreground trees comp and made it a guide layer to see where I need to place the fire elements. We're going to keep it simple in this comp and just add some of the ceiling fire windy assets to only one of the trees to make sure that we don't make the foreground too busy. So pick your tree and add your elements. These are the ones I used. And here is the position and scale info. Now we're going to work on the glow. Let's create a new adjustment layer. Let's call it background fire elements glow and add the deep glow effect. You don't have to use this glow plugin, but I highly recommend it. Go into the input and open mask and select the background fire elements as the layer. Then open up style and then tint. Enable it and make the color a dark orange. Change the mode to soft light and reduce the mix to 50%. Here's before and after. Let me explain why we added the matte layers to the fire element comps. If I remove the track matte, you can see the glow actually shows up faintly where they are not supposed to. This is because the glow layer is above the layer that is supposed to be in front of the fire elements. But it doesn't know that it's supposed to be behind and wrap the glow around those foreground layers. So by making sure that in the pre-comps where you have your fire elements, you use an alpha matte to get rid of whatever would not be showing because it's behind something, you're actually also telling the deep glow effect that only use a glow where the fire elements are actually showing. Anyway, let's duplicate this glow layer. Rename it to foreground fire elements glow. Change the mask layer to the foreground fire elements comp. Then duplicate it again and rename it to foreground trees fire elements. And again change the mask layer to be appropriate layer, which is the foreground trees fire elements layer. But here we're also going to change the tint's color to be more of an orange color. Duplicate this layer one more time and rename it to foreground burning wood elements. And then change the mask layer to be the foreground burning wood layer. Also change the tint color to be a slightly more reddish orange color. And that's it for the glow. Let me show you a before and after. It makes a huge difference. Let's create a new adjustment layer and apply the heat distortion effect. This is from Video Copilot. These are the settings I used. I reduced the distortion amount to 0.7, completely get rid of the heat amount, and lastly change the noise scale to 50. Let's create a new adjustment layer and call it camera shake. I am going to use a template we made to create this subtle camera shake. I've placed the link in the description to download it for free. I changed the position speed to 0.7 and the position amount to 9. Then change the anchor point speed to 0.5 and the amount to 2. This gives us a subtle movement for the camera so it's not entirely still. Let's also click on the stopwatch for the position and just animate from left to right. As you can see, this template also changes your scale to 105. Lastly, let's add one more adjustment layer, add lumetri color to it, increase the exposure to 1.5, the contrast to 50, and give it a very subtle S-curve, but mainly bringing the shadows down. Alright, so thank you for watching. This was part 1 where we created the forest fire environment. In part 2, we're going to set up the helicopter in Element 3D and add it to our shot. And also, if you're looking for stock footage elements, please do check out visualeffectspro.com. All of the elements we're using were from our website. I am also going to upload the project files to our website so you can download it, and if you want and you have the pegs, follow it along. Please do subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on part 2 and part 3, and also all of the future tutorials we are going to release. Thank you very much. Bye.